You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. The Paper That Forgot. If you have never seen a man look offended at 8:30 in the morning because the world has chosen to keep existing, you have missed one of the minor spectacles of New York. Nero Wolfe could do it without moving more than his eyes. On that Wednesday in March, he was doing it from his chair beside his desk, with his lips compressed and his gaze planted on me as if I were personally responsible for the telephone, the front doorbell, and human folly in all its branches. I was at my desk with the morning mail, sorting the wheat from the chaff and the checks from the cranks, while Wolfe, having returned from the plant rooms and consumed breakfast enough for a lumber crew, was prepared to devote himself to thought. What he got instead was me saying, "This one is from a lawyer on East 62nd Street, marked urgent, and written in the kind of hand that suggests either panic or old-fashioned honesty." Kupfui. Wolfe shut his eyes. They are often indistinguishable. I slit the envelope and unfolded 2 pages. Name of Nathaniel Borden, attorney at law. He requests the favor of an immediate interview regarding a matter involving a testamentary instrument, the death of one Jonas Creel, and what he calls an impossible alteration to a will. Wolfe opened one eye. Impossible. That is the word. Then it is merely improbable and therefore tedious. I went on reading. He states that Mr. Creel died last night at approximately 10 o'clock in his residence on Riddle Street. Present afterward were Borden, a physician named Dr. Levin, and a niece of the deceased, Miss Lena Harrow. According to Borden, Mr. Creel had just signed an amendment to his will in their presence. The writing was legible when witnessed. This morning the text of the amendment had almost entirely disappeared, leaving only the signature of Jonas Creel plainly visible. Wolfe's other eye opened. I looked over the page again. He says the document is in his possession, and that he will come at once if invited. Wolfe grunted. An ink that fades. That was my own sparkling thought. Number yours would have sparkled, that merely glimmered. He held out his hand. Give it to me. I crossed and handed over the letter. He read it, lips moving once on the phrase testamentary instrument, which meant he was interested in spite of himself and would deny it if accused. The house was quiet in the way it gets quiet after Fritz has retreated to his kingdom and before Saul Panzer or Orikatha remembers. He knows the address. Through the front windows the March light came in thin and grey. New York keeping one eye open just as Wolfe had done. Outside, trucks growled along 35th Street, and the city went ahead with its racket. But inside the office, the rug muffled the world, and the books along the walls stood in their patient rows. Wolfe, installed among them, looked as immovable as one of the larger pieces of furniture. He read Borden's letter twice and said, "Archie, yes, sir. If this is a hoax, I shall resent it. If it isn't, you'll enjoy it." He glared. "I do not enjoy death. Number you enjoy impossible pieces of paper." The bell rang. That is one of the advantages of working for Nero Wolfe. The universe is often willing to cue itself on time. A minute later I was back with Nathaniel Borden, who was exactly what his letter had sounded like. 60-ish, neat, thin, with a careful grey mustache and a black hat held too tightly in both hands. He had the look of a man who had spent his life among documents and had suddenly discovered that paper could bite. Wolfe did not rise. He inclined his head enough to qualify as civility. "Mr. Borden, sit down." Borden sat on the red leather chair opposite Wolfe's desk. He spared me one quick, appraising glance, recognized me for what I was, and then fixed on Wolfe as clients, and potential clients always do, as if the chair were a throne, and they had stumbled into a private monarchy. "You received my letter, Mr. Wolfe." "I did. My assistant has read it aloud. You may now improve it by stating the facts." Borden swallowed. "I shall try. Jonas Creel was my client for 14 years. He was a retired dealer in rare books and manuscripts, a widower with no children. His nearest blood relative was a niece, Miss Lena Harrow, daughter of his sister. He also kept in his house a companion, secretary, Miss Martha Wynne, who had been with him perhaps 6 years. There was, in addition, a nephew by marriage, Mr. Simon Creel, though he was not a blood relation. Was not? I asked. Borden turned to me. Simon Creel was Mr. Creel's nephew, on terms of intermittent dependence and frequent quarrel with his uncle. That sounds chilly, I said. It was. Wolf moved a finger, an inch. Proceed. Borden did. Creel had executed a will 3 years ago. The residue of his estate, amounting to somewhat over $400,000, was to be divided between Miss Lena and certain charitable bequests, with smaller legacies to Mrs. Wynne and 2 former employees. Last week he sent for me and stated that he intended to alter the disposition materially. He did not tell me why. He instructed me to prepare a codicil. What disposition? Wolf asked. Borden hesitated. The residue was to go to Mrs. Wynne. I sat up a little straighter. The companion, secretary, jumps from a modest legacy to the whole pie. Precisely. Was Miss Harrow pleased? She did not know. And Pell? He did not know either, so far as I am aware. Wolf's eyes were half shut. Continue. Yesterday evening, I went to Creel's house on Riddle Street with the drafted codicil. He received me in his upstairs sitting room. Present at various times were Mrs. Wynne, Miss Harrow, Dr. Aaron Levin, who had been attending him for a chronic heart condition, and the housemaid, Martha Wynne. Pell arrived later. There was unpleasantness. I said, "Was there ever?" He nodded unhappily. Creel was irritable and suspicious. He accused Miss Harrow of waiting for his death. He accused Pell of borrowing money under false pretenses. He accused Mrs. Wynne of disloyalty, then recanted, then insisted she alone had shown him devotion. It was difficult to know which remarks he meant and which were merely the fever of a dying man. Did he sign the codicil? Wolf asked. Yes. At approximately 9:45, I read it aloud. He declared it correct. He signed it in my presence. Dr. Levin and I signed as witnesses. Miss Harrow was in the room. Mrs. Wynne had left it moments before, after a quarrel. Pell was downstairs, or so I believed. And the text was visible. Entirely, I could have read it upside down across the room. Wolf nodded once. Then Creel suffered an attack shortly after 10. Dr. Levin did what he could, but he was dead within minutes. In the confusion that followed, I placed the codicil in my dispatch case. I took it home. This morning, intending to review it before beginning probate formalities, I opened the case and found that all writing on the sheet had faded except Creel's signature and portions of my own initials on the witness line. The body of the codicil is gone, I said. Gone, as in smudged, scraped, erased. He reached inside his coat and took out a flat envelope. Gone, as in vanished. He handed it to me. I passed it to Wolf. Wolf extracted a single folded sheet, opened it carefully, and looked. From where I stood, I could see the bottom signature, Jonas Creel, bold and dark in black ink. Above it, the page was nearly blank. There were the ghostliest traces of lines, like a memory of writing seen through fog, but no words. Wolf held it to the light, turned it over, sniffed once, and passed it to me. I examined it. Good bond paper, typed heading from Borden's office, identifying it as a codicil. Then nothing much until the signature. The blankness of the page gave me a queer sensation, as if the sheet were engaged in a private joke. Well, I said, the paper forgot. Borden looked at me sharply, maybe because he wasn't in a mood for humor, and maybe because he knew humor sometimes hides a hook. Wolf settled back. Who had access to the document after it was signed? Only I, to the best of my knowledge. To the best of your knowledge is a porous phrase. Borden flushed. My case remained with me. I left Creel's house shortly after 11. I stopped nowhere. I went directly home. The case remained in my study overnight. Locked? Number Wolf grunted. Who else was in your house? My wife, my sister, and a maid. None of them would have had the slightest interest in my client's testamentary papers. Interest is not required for meddling. opportunity is. Borden spread his hands helplessly. I understand that, Mr. Wolf, but I am telling you the truth. Truth is often inconveniently insufficient. Wolf put the document on the desk. Why have you come to me? If you suspect a chemical device, consult a chemist. If you suspect forgery or fraud, notify the district attorney. I have notified no one. Not yet. If the codicil cannot be proved, the prior will stand. If the codicil can somehow be restored, or if its contents can be established, Mrs. Wynne inherits nearly everything. The matter is explosive. There is already tension enough to invite scandal, and perhaps violence. I came to you because if this was deliberate, and I am convinced it was, then someone arranged for a document to appear valid for only a few hours. That strikes me as crime conceived with intelligence. Wolf's lips moved. That is usually a danger signal for criminals and a hopeful one for clients. I said, what about copies? Borden drew a breath. That is the worst of it. I made the draft from my notes yesterday afternoon on a small, portable typewriter kept at Creel's house for his convenience. The language was revised there in his room from his dictation. I had intended to prepare a clean office copy today. There is no carbon. My shorthand notes record some matters, but not the final exact wording. Convenient, I said. Painfully so. Wolf turned to me. Archie, call Mr. Kramer. Borden blinked. Inspector Kramer. Yes, inform him that if he desires to avoid blundering at the outset, he should come here within the hour. Borden stiffened. I did not ask for the police. No, Wolf said dryly. You ask for me, the distinction may prove educational. He looked at me again. And after that, go to Riddle Street, view the room, speak with the household, and bring back what facts can be had without too much embroidery. Take the codicil. That brought Borden half out of his chair. Mr. Wolf, I can hardly permit. You can either permit it or be irrelevant. If the paper was contrived to lose its writing, there may be a residue on the desk, the blotter, the pen, or the fingers of those concerned. Archie will look. If you prefer to bungle alone, take your paper and depart. Borden stayed where he was. After a moment he said, Very well. I took the page, slipped it into its envelope, and put it in my inside pocket. There was a gleam in Wolf's eyes now, not large but distinct. Like the first light in a window at dusk, he had smelled prey. Before Archie goes, he said. The people describe them. Borden obliged. Miss Lena Harrow is 32, unmarried, intelligent, and, if you will forgive the expression, armed at all points. She lives in Murray Hill, and saw her uncle often, though he both depended on and resented her. Miss Martha Wynne is perhaps 38, composed, efficient, and not easily read. She came to Creel as secretary, but effectively managed his household. Simon Creel is 40 or thereabout, agreeable when it suits him, and shabby at the edges of respectability. Dr. Levin is competent and cautious. Martha Wynne, the maid, has been with Creel 10 years. Enemies? Wolf asked. Borden made a face. Among themselves. Possibly all of Creel frequently. He was a generous man in theory and a tyrant in practice. He enjoyed dependence in others and despised them for displaying it. Excellent, I said. A dead man who distributed affection like poisoned candy. Wolf ignored me. Did Creel mention fear, threats, blackmail? Number, but during the evening he repeatedly demanded that the codicil be signed at once and witnessed at once, as if he feared some opportunity might vanish. I said. Instead, the opportunity signed and then vanished. Wolf glared at me, not because the line was bad, but because he had probably wanted it. After Borden left to place a call to his office from the hall phone, I got my coat and hat. Wolf stopped me with a question. Archie, what do you think? That someone wanted witnesses to read a fake bequest while it still existed, figuring the memory of respectable men would later do the work of missing ink, or else someone wanted the opposite, a signed blank sheet that could later be supplied with any text convenient. Yes. Also, if I were making a paper forget, I'd used disappearing ink, but you knew that before breakfast. He snorted. I knew it while shaving, which was before your breakfast and after mine. I went. Riddle Street was one of those old Manhattan blocks that look as if they had survived, not because anyone loved them, but because nobody had quite got around to killing them. The Creel house was a narrow brownstone gone dark with age, its stoop worn in the middle and the brass on the bell pull in need of argument. The neighborhood had once been respectable, then tired, then cheap, and was now beginning to grow ambitious again, which meant scaffolding half a block away and a delicatessen selling imported olives to people who would have been better off with a ham sandwich. A woman in black opened the door to my ring. She was stout, pink-faced, and red-eyed with the wary resentment of old servants toward new trouble. Martha Wynne? I asked. Yes, Archie Goodwin. Mr. Borden said I was coming. She admitted me as if surrendering under protest. The hall smelled faintly of furniture, polish, and stale medicine. There was also underneath a dry old paper smell I always like, maybe because it suggests rooms where somebody has been thinking. Jonas Creel had been a dealer in rare books. The house wore the trade like a second skin. Books were everywhere. On tables, in cabinets, in disciplined shelves, rising behind glass. The front parlor had 2 display cases locked with small brass keys. I took a glance and saw vellum, tooled leather, and price tags that would have made a banker blink. Martha Wynne led me upstairs. Mrs. Wynne is in Mr. Creel's room. Miss Harrow is in the back parlor. Mr. Pell has gone out. Dr. Levin ain't here. A pity, doctors liven things. She made a sound that could have meant anything from agreement to contempt. Creel's sitting room was on the second floor front, a large chamber with 2 tall windows, heavy curtains, a gas log fireplace converted badly to modern habits, and enough bookcases to keep an ordinary family occupied for generations. The dead man was gone, but death had left a card. The air still held the faint, sweet, sour trace of illness and camphor. On a large table by the bed stood medicine bottles, a water glass, a silver reading lamp, a pad of paper, and a black portable typewriter with its case open. A woman turned from the mantel as I entered. She was not the kind you forgot after one look. Martha Wynne was slim and dark, with smooth hair and a composed face that would have been plain if composure had not given it force. She had grey eyes with a level stare and hands that looked capable of opening letters, managing servants, balancing accounts, and, if necessary, strangling a man without disarranging the cuffs. "You are Mr. Goodwin," she said. "I have been accused of it." Mr. Borden telephoned. "You are from Nero Wolfe?" "Yes." She nodded, as if filing the fact where it might later be useful. "I had expected the police first. You may still get lucky." Her mouth almost smiled, then reconsidered. "What do you want?" "The room, the typewriter, the people, and the truth, not necessarily in that order." She regarded me. "Mr. Creel is not yet buried. Number and his money already has more callers than mourners." She turned away and then back. "That is accurate enough to be offensive. I seldom miss by far." She gestured. "Look about." I did. The desk was small and old, more a reading table than a work table, but the typewriter sat on it with a sheet still rolled halfway into the platen, blank. I bent, careful not to touch, and saw no ribbon smears on the keys. Beside it lay a fountain pen, uncapped, black and gold. There was a blotter with 3 sheets, the top unused except for a faint pressure mark. I tipped it to the light. No legible impression. "Was this the pen used for the signature?" I asked. "Yes." "And the typewriter for the codicil?" "Yes." "Who handled them after Mr. Creel died?" Mr. Borden moved the paper. Dr. Levin cleared some medicine bottles. I closed the pen. Martha Wynne straightened the room this morning. From the doorway came a voice. That sounded admirably frank, perhaps because it omitted everything interesting. I turned. Lena Harrow had arrived. Nathaniel Borden had called her intelligent and armed at all points. He had not exaggerated. She was blonde in the cool, expensive way, tall and straight, with a face that might have looked merely handsome until she spoke and lit it with precision. She wore black too, but hers had been cut by a smart dressmaker, and knew it. "You are Archie Goodwin," she said. "I recognize you from a photograph published after the Dakin case. I'm flattered and nervous. You ought to be only the first." Mrs. Wynn's voice was cool. "Mr. Goodwin is here on business." "Then he is among friends," Mrs. Harrow said. "Everyone in this house has business." That was promising. I like a room where the temperature drops as soon as one person enters. I took out my notebook. "Mrs. Harrow, since you're here, suppose you give me your version." Gladly. My uncle had always been difficult, but during the last month he became theatrical. He enjoyed keeping everyone uncertain. Yesterday he sent for Mr. Borden and announced, in my presence and Mrs. Wynn's, that he intended to change his will. He did not say how. Later, when the document was prepared, he had it read aloud. "You heard it all? Every word." What did it say? Her eyes sharpened. That the residue of his estate was to go to Mrs. Wynne in recognition of faithful service and personal devotion. I glanced at Mrs. Wynne. She said nothing. "You objected?" I asked Clara. "Of course," I objected, not because I expected money as a right, but because my uncle was in no condition to be manipulated. Martha Wynne spoke then. "Manipulated by whom? I was trying to persuade him to postpone the whole matter." Clara laughed once. "You were watching the page as if your life depended on it." Mrs. Wynne's color rose, which improved her. "That is false." "Ladies," I said, "save the clause for the official inquest." Clara ignored me. "My uncle altered his affections 3 times a day, Mr. Goodwin. Yesterday afternoon, he accused Mrs. Wynne of stealing from him." I turned. "Did he?" Mrs. Wynne answered flatly. "He accused everyone of everything. He had misplaced a receipted bill, and later he left you nearly $500,000. "Yes." "How did you take that?" Her gaze came to me full, with disgust. "That was good." "Too good, maybe. People who truly feel disgust seldom phrase it so neatly," I asked. "Did Simon Creel hear the codicil read?" "No," Clara said. "He came afterward." Mrs. Wynne said, "He may have heard part of it from the hall." "That's different from afterward," I told her. "Yes," she said, "it is." I marked that. He protested that Uncle Jonas should not be agitated. Uncle Jonas shouted at him to be a doctor and not a priest. "That sounds like him," I asked. Clara looked at the bed and softened a fraction. "Yes." I went to the typewriter. "Did anyone besides Borden type on this yesterday?" "Not in my presence," said Mrs. Wynne, Clara said. "Mr. Pell touched it." That got my attention. "When?" "After the document had been signed, but before Uncle's attack." He came into the room while Mr. Borden was putting away papers. Pell made some foolish remark about composing his own obituary and tapped the keys. Mrs. Wynne said at once, "That is false. He came nowhere near the machine." Clara turned to her. "He stood exactly there," she pointed, "and put his hand on it." Mrs. Wynne's face tightened. "He leaned over the desk. He did not touch the typewriter." That was pretty. 2 women in a death room disagreeing, not on a motive or a fortune, but on whether a man's hand had landed on a machine. "That kind of disagreement has roots," I asked. "Which of you quarreled with Creel just before the signing?" "Neither liked that," which meant both had. Mrs. Wynne answered first. "I told him he was being unfair and ill. He ordered me out." Clara said, "I told him he was making a fool of himself. He told me I had been waiting 20 years to say so." "And Pell?" Clara's mouth hardened. "Simon wanted money. That is all Simon has ever wanted." I pocketed that too. By then I had enough atmosphere and not enough facts, so I made a careful inspection of the table, desk, and wastebasket. In the basket were a torn envelope, a used handkerchief, 2 medicine wrappers, and a single strip of typing paper crumpled hard. I opened it, blank, except for one typed word at the top. "Simon," I looked at Mrs. Wynne. "Yours," Number Clara said. "Perhaps the paper remembers more Then the witnesses. Nobody smiled. I folded the scrap and put it away. Then I asked to see Pell, but he had not returned. Dr. Levin had gone to his office. Martha Wynne, when questioned downstairs, proved less informative than a locked drawer, but gave me one useful item. She had heard Jonas Creel shout at someone, an hour before the signing, "You think a name on paper makes you safe? It makes you naked." She couldn't swear whom he had been addressing, in a house like that. It could have been anybody. When I got back to West 35th Street, Inspector Kramer was just leaving and looked as if Wolf had been feeding him nails. That improved my spirits. He stopped in the hall. "If this turns out to be another one of Wolf's parlor tricks, Goodwin, you'll what? Buy him orchids." He snorted and shoved past me. Inside the office, Wolf was in his chair, eyes closed, fingertips together. Borden had returned and sat rigid. The fading codicil lay on Wolf's desk beside a magnifying glass, a ruler and 3 books from the shelves that looked as if they had not been disturbed in years, but had known they would be needed eventually. "Well," Wolf said without opening his eyes. I gave it to him from the top, with the room, the women, the typewriter, the pen, the scrap with Simon on it, and the disagreement over Pell's hand. I finished with Martha Wynne's overheard line. Wolf opened his eyes at that. "A name on paper makes you naked." Her exact words. Borden licked his lips. "What does it mean?" Wolf ignored him. "Did you see Dr. Levin?" Number he had gone, and Pell also absent, which, from your expression, was inconsiderate. Wolf leaned back. "Mr. Borden, do you happen to know whether your client ever used special inks, chemical reagents, or restoration fluids in his manuscript business?" Borden stared. "I do not know. He bought and sold old papers. He would have known such things existed." "Yes?" Wolf turned to me. "Archie, after lunch you will see Dr. Levin and Mr. Pell. Also learn whether Jonas Creel purchased chemicals, inks, or stationery recently. Begin with his shops and his accounts if necessary. That should fill a cheerful afternoon. It should fill your mouth less than lunch, which is an advantage." Borden ventured. "Mr. Wolf, do you truly believe this was contrived?" Wolf's eyes went to the pale page on his desk. "Sir, paper has no memory and no forgetfulness. Men supply both. The document did exactly what someone intended it to do." "Then why?" Borden demanded. "If Mrs. Wynne was to benefit, why destroy the evidence? If she was not to benefit, why create it?" Wolf's lips twitched. "That, Mr. Borden, is the only interesting question." Fritz came in then to announce lunch, and Borden was dismissed with the promise that he would be informed when Wolf had anything more than irritation. After he had gone, I stayed standing by my desk because I knew the signs. Wolf was chewing something bigger than a paragraph. At length he said, "Archie, yes, if a man wished to make a written provision appear for an evening and vanish by morning, he would need certainty of timing that requires not merely chemistry, but control. Of the paper, the ink, or the witness? Precisely. And which do you like?" "I do not like any of them." "That is not an answer." "It is the beginning of one." Creel insisted on speed. "That means he feared interruption. He accused someone that a name on paper made one naked. That suggests exposure, not generosity. And the scrap with Simon typed upon it is either a clumsy signpost or a clumsy attempt to look like one. Nothing like clumsiness to make a case feel at home." Wolf ignored that too. One more thing. The signature remained. Different ink, possibly, or a different instrument, or the body of the text was never what it seemed. I took a breath, a signed blank. Perhaps. Then Borden and Levin and Clara all read words that weren't really there. He looked at me with immense distaste for my slowness. "Archie, men do not see with their eyes alone. They see also with expectation, vanity, fear, greed, and suggestion. A room containing a dying man, an attorney, an anxious doctor, an aggrieved niece, and a devoted secretary is admirably equipped to misread almost anything. That was Wolf at his best and worst. When he was right, he was magnificent. When he was only early, he was unbearable. I went to lunch, thinking about a dead bookseller, a vanished bequest, and a scrap with one typed word on it. By then the case had already begun to tighten, though I didn't know where the knot was. Jonas Creel had died, leaving behind a page that remembered only his name. Somebody somewhere in that brownstone on Riddle Street knew why, and before the day was out, one of them would try to make sure the page was not the only thing that forgot. I can continue the same original mystery in a classic-inspired Wolf Fadachi mode. Chapter 2. The last room upstairs after lunch. Wolf sent me out again, with instructions that sounded casual and weren't. "See Levin first," he said. "Doctors are most truthful before they have been warned by lawyers. Then Pell, if he can be found. After that, learn everything purchasable about Jonas Creel in the last month that could stain, fade, erase, preserve, or counterfeit ink. Also bring me beer. That last item keeps the operation human. It keeps it tolerable. I got the beer first because I know my employer, then started on Dr. Aaron Levin. His office was on Lexington, 3rd floor, 2 rooms and a waiting area with tired magazines, and a receptionist who looked as if she had been trained to repel optimism. She told me Dr. Levin had 10 minutes. When I went in, he had 8 of them ready to object with. He was medium height, spare, with a high forehead, and those neat physician's hands that look capable of stitching a wound or signing a death certificate with the same calm economy. He recognized my name at once and didn't care for what came with it. That shows civic spirit. I'm not here to tax it. I only want facts. I have given facts. Then we'll enjoy the repetition. He sat back. Proceed. Jonas Creel, how sick. Sick enough to die. Not necessarily last night. Chronic cardiac weakness, severe strain, episodes of breathlessness, insomnia, agitation. His mind was clear in intervals and disordered in others. Disordered enough to sign away $400,000 on a whim. Levin made a face. I am a physician, not a judge of wills. Still, you formed an opinion. Yes. My opinion was that he should not have been conducting legal business in that condition. Did you say so? Repeatedly. And he ignored you. He dismissed me with his usual civility. That is to say, none. Levin's mouth tightened. Mr. Creel was not a pleasant patient. Who was pleasant to him? Mrs. Wynne with competence, Mrs. Harrow with determination, Pell, when he wanted something, Borden, out of professional necessity. That is a fair menu. Now about the paper. You saw the words plainly? Yes. Read them? Yes. Would you swear in court the residue was left to Martha Wynne? Yes. That was solid and prompt. I tried a side road. How long did the paper lie out before it was signed? Perhaps 5 minutes. Borden read it aloud. Creel interrupted twice to change a phrase. Borden typed the changes. On the machine in the room. Yes. Who was present then? Borden, Creel, Mrs. Harrow, and I, Mrs. Wynne, had just gone out. Why? She and Creel had quarreled. About the will. About everything. In that house, all subjects became one subject. I nodded. Did Pell enter before the attack? Yes. That made a small bell ring, and he came in grinning, was rebuked by Miss Harrow, made some offensive light remark, and moved to the desk, touched the typewriter. Levin hesitated the smallest fraction. I believe so. Believe or no. I saw his hand on the desk. It may have touched the machine. Good. Another witness leaning Mrs. Lena's way, though not with gusto. What sort of man is Pell? The sort who survives. Useful answer. Did Creel trust him? Number. But he sometimes preferred an untrustworthy man he understood to trustworthy women he did not. That was good enough to keep. I asked the question Wolf had planted in me. Did Creel ever discuss inks, fading agents, old manuscript restoration, chemical reagents? Levin's eyes shifted. just enough. He did ask me, he said, whether certain medicinal solutions containing alcohol might affect writing on paper. I thought he was rambling. When? 10 days ago. What exactly did he ask? Whether tincture of iodine spirits of ammonia or chloral preparations could blur ink, raise old stains, or leave marks invisible at first and visible later. I told him I was not a chemist and advised him to stop handling ancient papers in bed. That was a nice plump item, and I tucked it in. Did you tell anyone? Number, did he say why he wanted to know? He said only, paper tells lies longer than men do. Doctors hear odd things for a living, but Levin was uneasy now, as if the sentence had grown teeth overnight. I thanked him and left. Pell took longer. I found him at a bar off 3rd Avenue that had once been respectable and had since discovered cash. It was not yet 4 o'clock, but Simon Creel was already giving his attention to a glass and a brunette who had the air of working in commissions. When he saw me, he smiled as though he had been expecting a creditor and got a cousin instead. "Goodwin," he said, "sit down and instruct me in innocence." "I don't instruct cheap." "Then have a drink and accuse me." He was a smooth one, still handsome if you ignored the slight pouch under the eyes and the collar, a shade too shiny. His suit had been good a year ago, and his tie had been chosen by a man who liked applause. "I'm fresh from Jonas Creel's funeral parlor, without the parlor," I told him. "How hard did his death hit you?" He lifted a shoulder. "Emotionally, not at all. Financially, perhaps. He had promised to help me and enjoyed postponing the help." "With what?" "Investments, debts, life. And last night. Last night he abused me, accused me of begging, and croaked before I could decide whether to be grateful." "Did you know he had changed his will?" His smile thinned. "I knew he was threatening to. Jonas liked waving paper about. It made him feel like Jupiter with a fountain pen. Did you hear the codicil read? Number, did you touch the typewriter?" "Number," he said it too quickly. "And men who live by charm ought not to sprint unless chased. 2 people say you did. Then 2 people are imaginative. You went to the desk." I leaned on it. "After the signing?" "Yes." "What for?" He sipped his drink. "To look at the old tyrant's battlefield. What else?" I watched him. "You ever used disappearing ink as a boy?" He gave me an amused stare. "Number, but I forged report cards beautifully." The brunette laughed, and I decided she wasn't adding to the inquiry. "Where were you between 11 and midnight?" "Walking." "Where?" "New York." "Adrian, don't make me work for the obvious. Did you want Creel dead?" His smile vanished. "Number, I wanted him alive and paying." There was honesty in that, or something close enough to sell retail. I left him and spent the next 2 hours learning the shopping habits of Jonas Creel. An old dealer in books on 4th Avenue told me Creel had lately bought 3 kinds of ink, though that by itself meant little. Another man, who sold archival supplies and thought customers were a regrettable necessity, remembered an order sent to Riddle Street a week ago: special bond paper, gum eraser, pen cleaner, and a small bottle of temporary marking fluid used by restorers to indicate spots for treatment. Temporary marking fluid interested me until he explained that it turned pale blue and vanished in a day. Not black, not relevant probably, but in Wolf's business probably has a way of becoming yes. The best item came from a stationer on Madison who had sold Creel a packet of obsolete typing ribbons acquired from a warehouse lot. "Old stock," he said. "Don't know why he wanted them," said Modern Ribbon, struck too wet. That was better. Old Ribbon, dry strike, odd preferences. I got back to the brownstone at 6:15. Wolf was in the office where I had left him, except that a fresh vase of orchids had arrived from upstairs, and his mood had gone from merely sour to meditatively dangerous. I reported in order. He listened with his eyes closed, interrupting only twice. "At what point?" he asked. "Did Levin say Creel inquired about chemical effects on writing 10 days ago?" And Pell denied touching the typewriter, like a man denying fatherhood. Wolf opened his eyes. "A coarse simile, but serviceable. I finished with the stationer and the old ribbons." That brought him upright. "Old stock," Dree, his word. Did he identify the make? Number? He had records. I can get them. You will. He drummed once with his fingers, very lightly. That meant the machine had started. I said, You have something. Yes. Would you care to astonish me? Number that keeps the friendship fresh. Wolf ignored it. The disappearance was scheduled. That was clear at once. But schedule is meaningless without mechanism. A legal document is seen, read aloud, corrected, signed, witnessed, and then vanishes by morning. Such a trick must satisfy 4 conditions. First, the text must appear authentic while needed. Second, it must remain legible long enough for all witnesses to accept it. Third, it must vanish without obvious tampering. Fourth, the signature must survive. Agreed. That is why I work for you instead of a hat. Check, girl. He frowned. The simplest method is not chemical writing on plain paper, but typed text produced with a medium designed to fade. That was where I was edging. Yes, but without elegance. A dry or unstable ribbon could produce letters sufficiently dark for some hours, and then lose density, especially under warmth and air. The signature, made in ordinary ink, would remain. I stared. A typewriter ribbon that forgets on schedule. Possibly. Can that happen? Anything can happen to bad materials, and more to materials deliberately doctored. I thought it over. Then the crucial thing isn't the pen, it's the machine, or the ribbon in it. That tightened the whole frame. If the ribbon was prepared in advance, someone had to know that exact machine would be used and roughly when. Precisely. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Which reduces the circle. Not Borden, unless he conspired after arriving. He brought a draft but used Creel's machine for corrections. Therefore, the instrument had been waiting. Someone in the house arranged it. That gives us March, Lena. Martha Wynne, maybe Pell if he had access earlier. Also Creel himself. That stopped me. You think he set the trap? I think it is time to stop assuming the dead man was merely prey. He reached for the telephone. Get me Mr. Borden. I dialed. Borden was in. Wolf took the call. Mr. Borden, one question. Had Mr. Creel been altering his testamentary intentions repeatedly in recent weeks? Yes. How often? 3 times. And on each occasion were drafts prepared and then abandoned. I see. And were those drafts typed in your office? Except the last preliminary memorandum, which was typed at Creel's house from his dictation. Good. Bring me any notes you have on the wording of each proposed change at once. He hung up. Well? I asked. Wolf's mouth tightened in satisfaction. Those closest to Creel say he had been changing his will for weeks. That may be true, but if so, the important point is not indecision. It is rehearsal. Rehearsal for what? For the exact conditions under which a paper would be believed. The room got quieter then. Outside traffic on 35th Street muttered through the early dark. Somewhere upstairs, Fritz moved a pan, and the smell of stock and butter came drifting down the hall. In the office, the fading codicil lay under the lamp, blank as innocence and twice as false. Wolf looked at it as if it had personally insulted him. Archie, he said, tonight, no one is to leave New York if I can prevent it. Tomorrow morning I want the typewriter from Riddle Street on this desk, the ribbon with it, and Mr. Simon Creel, where I can observe him lying. That sounds like a wholesome program. It is the beginning, Wolf said, of confusion becoming truth again. And that was how the last room upstairs ceased to be merely a death room and became a stage. The lamp, the desk, the machine, the blank page with one surviving name, none of them had betrayed anything. They had obeyed. The betrayal had been human. Chapter 3. Those who stood to gain by 9 o'clock Thursday morning. I had seen enough of Jonas Creel's circle to know that affection had never been the cement in that house. Dependence had done the work, with resentment tucked into the joints like rotten mortar. A man can build a respectable life on that combination if he is careful. Jonas Creel had built a siege. Wolf, having finished breakfast and returned from the plant rooms in a condition of temporary tolerance, listened while I gave him what I had from the day before. When I had done, he leaned back and shut his eyes. "The error," he said, "is common. That narrows it to the human race." He twitched a finger. "Every own attached to Creel had quarrels with him. That is noise. We require structure. Quarrels do not kill, arrangements kill, nor do they cause writing to vanish on schedule unless they are accompanied by knowledge and access." "That sounds handsome," I said. "You should have it printed on cards." He ignored that, as he nearly always did when he should have thanked me. "Today, we consider gain, not greed in the abstract, but gain specific enough to have weight. Who profited if the paper stood? Who profited if it failed? Who profited merely by confusion? That gives us a healthy morning." Before I could add anything else, the bell rang, and 2 minutes later Sol Panzer came in carrying the typewriter from Riddle Street in its case, as if it contained either a child or a bomb. Sol had fetched it on Wolf's authority, which meant by methods better left undescribed. He set it on my desk. "Ribbon still in it," he said. "Nobody happy when I took it." "Were they ever?" I asked. "Number." He glanced at Wolf. "Also, the nephew was there. Simon Creel, sour, watchful, and underdressed for his opinion of himself." "That was new, Simon." Saul nodded. "He had arrived from Philadelphia early this morning." When Saul had gone, Wolf opened his eyes. "Good. One more claimant to appetite." He had the typewriter placed on a side table and forbade me to touch it until a man he knew in a laboratory downtown could examine the ribbon without encouraging amateurism. That left the people, which was just as well. An unstable ribbon could explain the trick, but not the choice of victim or the timing. For that you needed human beings, and Jonas had been generous with them. The first to arrive was Elias Thorne, the solicitor who had taken over some of Creel's routine legal matters from Nathaniel Borden years before, and had then remained as one of those legal barnacles wealthy men accumulate without quite noticing. Thorne was small, bald, polished, and faintly yellow, like a candle that had been kept too long in a drawer. He had a courteous voice and eyes that moved quickly, while the rest of him stayed still. "I understand," he said after taking the red leather chair, "that Mr. Wolf is inquiring into the circumstances of Mr. Creel's death and certain irregularities concerning a codicil." "I am inquiring," Wolf said, "into whatever interests me. You may assist." Thorne folded his gloves neatly. "I shall try." "Try less and state more. What was your relation to Creel?" "I managed leases, tax correspondence, and some contractual matters related to his book dealings. I was not his principal testamentary advisor. That was Borden. But you knew his affairs well enough, and his family." Thorne's mouth thinned. "Mr. Creel was not a domestic success." "That was visible at a distance," I said. He cast me a quick look and returned to Wolf. His niece Lena Harrow visited often. She believed herself a moderating influence. His nephew Simon Creel visited seldom and usually for money. There were others of less consequence. "Lena Harrow," Wolf said, "daughter of Mr. Creel's late sister. Her married name is Harrow, though she is now widowed." That at least laid one plank of order across the shifting names and relations. "Did she expect to inherit?" Wolf asked. "Expectation is a dangerous term. She believed she had claims of affection and long service. Whether Mr. Creel agreed on any given day depended on his temper." "And Simon?" Thorne gave the smallest shrug. "Simon expected everything and deserved little." "That is not rare," I said. "No," he agreed, "only expensive." Wolf's eyes were half closed. "Did Creel alter his will repeatedly?" "Yes, more than once. He liked the sensation of keeping others off balance. He would announce changes, hint at bequests, summon papers, then postpone execution. In the past month, the frequency increased." "Did he discuss reasons?" "Distrust. He suspected everyone. Then he missed them when they were absent and revised his suspicions downward. That must have been restful for the household." Thorne allowed himself a dry movement at one corner of the mouth. "It was not. Did you ever see him experiment with inks, papers, ribbons, or restorers' materials?" That got a pause. Then Thorne said, "He was a dealer in rare books, and often spoke of paper as though it were alive. He bought odd supplies, I attached no significance to it. But now significance attaches itself everywhere. After Thorn left, I asked, "Do you trust him?" Wolf snorted. "Certainly not. But he is cautious, which often serves truth when virtue is unavailable." Our next guest was Dr. Caleb Drew, who made Dr. Levin of Chapter 2 look almost merry by comparison. Drew was older, heavy in the jowls, exact in dress, and so steady in manner that one immediately suspected an obstinate streak large enough to stop traffic. He had attended Jonas years earlier, before Levin took over the daily management of the heart condition. That gave him the advantages of distance and history. Creel was difficult, Drew said at once. Let us save time. He was vain, suspicious, sentimental in flashes, and tyrannical by habit. He also had a very strong instinct for self-dramatization. Did that include rearranging his will as a parlor game? I asked. Drew looked at me as if my question had smudged his cuffs. In effect, Wolf said. Could he have staged his own final confusion? Drew considered. Medically, yes, intellectually. More than likely. Physically, however, he was failing. Any elaborate performance would have required help, or at least prior preparation. There, Wolf said. Prior preparation. Drew nodded. Quite. Did he trust anyone? Number need anyone? Yes, the two are often neighbors. Whom did he need most? Lena Harrow for family continuity, though he resented it. Thorn for orderly affairs. Levin for daily management. The servant for comfort. Simon only when he wanted to display contempt. That was a neat set, and I wrote it down. When Drew had gone, Lena Harrow arrived. She was what the fashionable shops call beautifully preserved, which sounds to me like a peach in a jar, but in her case it was true enough. Tall, fair, composed, with excellent clothes, and the sort of quiet poise that comes from having survived disappointment without granting it a vote. Her eyes were grey and cool. She and Jonas had the same chin, which was useful because it let me imagine him younger and less impossible. She sat and said, Mr. Wolf, I don't know whether you are trying to protect my uncle's reputation or destroy it, but I wish you would do whichever it is quickly. I have no interest in reputations, Wolf said. Only facts. Then you may have less than you hoped. My uncle liked producing scenes. It gave him something to dominate. Did you love him? I asked. She turned to me, not offended, merely accurate. At intervals. That sounds familial. It was, Wolf said. Did you expect to inherit from him? I expected nothing reliable. At one time I was his favorite relative. At another I was a bloodsucker with social ambitions. By evening I might be both. Were you in need of money? Number was Simon? Yes. No embroidery. No hesitation. Did Simon know that? Everyone knew it except Simon. He called it temporary embarrassment and wore it like a boutonniere. I liked her a little then. Did your uncle threaten to disinherit you? Wolf asked. Many times. And to restore you, also many times. Were you present when the codicil was read? She held his gaze. Yes. You read the text yourself. Yes. And what did it do? It left the residue to Martha Wynne. That brought us back onto the main track with a satisfying click. I asked. Did that astonish you? Number, it disgusted me, because she manipulated him. Because he wanted me to think so. That was better than most people give you for free. Wolf's eyes opened a little wider. Explain. Lena folded her hands. My uncle had a habit of arranging emotional geometries. If he favored me, he wanted Simon jealous. If he favored Simon, he wanted me alarmed. If he favored Mrs. Wynne, he wanted both of us humiliated and her indebted. He enjoyed the pattern more than the substance. Wolf grunted. Excellent, that accords with what we know. Does it? She asked. Then you know also that he had been changing his will for weeks, not from uncertainty but from appetite. He liked summoning people with the prospect of reward hanging in the air. Rehearsal, I said. She looked at me. That is exactly the word I would have used. After she left, I told Wolf. She's good. Yes. Too good, possibly, but she contributes. And Simon must be heard. We heard him an hour later. Simon Creel was 35 or so, with the long nose and narrow shoulders of a man assembled from spare parts, and then taught to sneer as compensation. He was not drunk, which surprised me. He merely looked practiced at the condition. His suit was loud, his tie wrong, and his bitterness had the fresh polish of recent use. "You people," he said from the doorway before even sitting, "seem to think my uncle was murdered." "No," I told him. "We think he was tiresome. Murder is still under consideration." He dropped into the chair and crossed his legs aggressively. "He died of his heart. Ask any doctor." "We have asked too," Wolf said. "Sit still and answer." Simon's mouth tightened. "What do you want?" "Money," I said. "Always a good opening. Were you counting on Jonas for any?" "That's between family." "Exactly where it usually gets dirty." He glared at me and then turned to Wolf, sensing the larger predator. "He had helped me in the past. Loans. Advances. You paid." Simon hesitated. "Not in full." "Were you in his will?" "I don't know." "That is false," Wolf said. Simon actually blinked. Wolf can do that to people by making a flat statement with no decoration whatever. "I knew I had been named once," Simon said. "Not recently." "Did you know of the codicil?" "Numbered. Did you know he had been altering his will?" "Yes. He told me so every time he wanted me uncomfortable." "Did you visit him last night?" "Number. I came this morning from Philadelphia." "Can you prove that?" "Yes. That one came too fast and a shade too loud. I wrote it down with a private star." Wolf said. "Had you access to his house within the last week?" "Number. Another star." "Did you know Mrs. Wynne?" "Of course. She played housekeeper, Empress." "Did you hate her?" Simon shrugged. "I didn't need to. Jonas did enough hating for everyone. That was not bad. Even liars occasionally borrow truth to carry the weight." When he had gone, slamming the front door hard enough to make the hall answer, I looked across at Wolf. Well, he had one finger pressed to his lip. "Gain is clarifying. Thorn gains order, not fortune. Drew gains nothing. Lena gains by the failure of the codicil, since it restores uncertainty or a prior arrangement favorable to blood. Simon gains by any collapse of the paper, and more by any general scandal that delays inquiry into his own finances. Martha Wynne gains if the codicil stands, unless she gains more by appearing to lose. That's a cheerful bouquet. Yes, but opportunity narrows faster than motive. Thorn had documents, not the room. Drew had medical authority, not household control. Simon may have appetite, but unless he lied about access, he lacked the mechanism. Lena had proximity and intelligence. Martha Wynne had both and more, I said. And Jonas himself had stage direction. Precisely. That was the point. In most murder investigations, the question is who wanted the dead man dead. In this one, the dead man had left behind a trick, and tricks belong first to the person who designed the stage. Wolf wasn't separating saints from sinners. There weren't any saints handy. He was separating greed from opportunity, because greed was cheap and plentiful, while opportunity had edges. At 6, a messenger arrived from the laboratory with a note and a sample strip from the typewriter ribbon sealed in an envelope. Wolf read the note and made a sound deep in his chest that meant satisfaction with complications. "Well," I asked. "The ribbon," he said, "is old stock indeed, and tampered with. The ink composition is unstable, partially treated with a volatile solvent. Under ordinary striking, it would leave a readable impression for some hours, and then fade drastically as the carrier evaporated." I whistled. "So the paper kept its appointment?" "Yes. The writing did not disappear by magic. It disappeared by schedule. And now." Wolf put the note on the desk. "Now we know method enough to begin hunting selection. Someone prepared that ribbon, installed it in Creel's typewriter, and relied on the codicil being read, believed, and later rendered doubtful. The question is not who quarreled with Jonas. Everyone quarreled with Jonas. The question is, who knew that in the last room upstairs, on the proper evening, truth would need only a few hours before confusion could take over? He leaned back and shut his eyes. Archie, he said, tomorrow we stop talking about who stood to gain and begin on who stood close enough to act. That was fair. Gain explains appetite, but method explains murder, fraud, and the rest of the human entertainments. Jonas Creel had left behind no obvious signs of violence, only a dead body, a lamp, a machine, and a sheet of paper that had betrayed its own message on schedule. The quarrels in his household were real enough, but Wolf had done with quarrels. He wanted hands, not tempers. And one or more of those hands had been in that room before the ink forgot how to stay. Chapter 4. The witnesses of fading words. It is one of the disadvantages of a complicated household that when a dead man leaves behind money, every memory in the house suddenly acquires a lawyer. By Friday morning we had 3 of them. Wolf had arranged the interviews in the office, not because he preferred convenience, which he did, but because he preferred witnesses away from the furniture that had helped them think. He had me place the 3 chairs in a line facing his desk. Simon Creel with his defensive sneer, Lena Harrow with her cool poise, and Martha Wynne, the housekeeper, whose plain black dress and compressed lips gave her the look of a woman who had spent 20 years clearing up after the emotions of others, and had grown weary of both dust and tears. The fading codicil lay on Wolf's desk in its envelope. Beside it was the note from the laboratory about the doctored ribbon. Wolf had not shown that to anyone. He began with Lena. You saw the document before it was signed. Yes. Read it clearly. Yes. And its effect? She looked at Simon before answering, which interested Wolf and me equally. It named Simon sole heir to the residue. Simon turned on her. That is the first sensible thing you've said. Wolf lifted one finger. Silence returned. Entire residue? He asked. Yes, and you would swear to that? I would. Simon's mouth had gone a little soft around the edges, the way greedy men's mouths do when they think fortune has briefly become fact. I did. What did it say? That Jonas Creel revoked prior provisions and left everything of consequence to me. Everything of consequence, Wolf repeated. A lawyer's phrase in a debtor's mouth. Simon flushed. That was the sense of it. Was it read aloud? Yes. By whom? Borden. And you heard every word? Yes. Wolf's gaze shifted to Martha Wynne. You. She clasped and unclasped her hands. I didn't hear it all, sir. Not the way they did. Mr. Creel had rung for me because he wanted another lamp brought in. I came with it just after Mr. Borden had finished reading. Then Mr. Simon took the paper and held it where we could all see. He said plain enough that Mr. Creel had done right at last and that he was sole heir. Simon snapped. I said nothing of the kind. Martha turned a level stare on him. You said sole heir, Mr. Simon. I remember it because Miss Lena made a sound in her throat as if she had swallowed vinegar. That was good. Lena's nostrils moved, but only a little. Wolf's eyes narrowed. You brought another lamp. Why? Martha hesitated. The bedside lamp wasn't throwing well, sir. Mr. Simon said the print was hard to make out. That caught. Wolf said mildly. The print? Yes, sir. He said the lamp ought to be nearer. Who moved it nearer? I looked at Simon. His expression had stiffened half a beat. Too late. Wolf's voice remained mild, which is when it is most dangerous. Close over the page. Yes, sir, very close, he said. The letters looked pale. Lena turned to Simon. That is true. I had forgotten it until she spoke. Simon laughed, but the laugh had corners on it. This is nonsense. A lamp is a lamp. No, Wolf said. It is not. What kind of bulb? Martha answered at once. One of the strong white ones, sir. Mr. Creel didn't like the yellow kind. Wolf leaned back. And how long was the paper held under this strong light? Not long, Lena said. A minute too, perhaps. Long enough, Wolf murmured. Simon shifted in his chair. Long enough for what? To read it. Yes, Wolf did not answer him. He looked at me. Archie, the bedside lamp from Riddle Street. Is it here? In the hall closet. Bring it. I did. Wolf had arranged for Saul to collect that too, along with the typewriter, because he distrusts anything that has been left overnight in a hostile house. I set the lamp on the side table. It was a brass reading lamp with a metal shade that threw its light downward in a concentrated pool. Wolf examined the socket label. 100 watts, I said. That will do more than flatter a witness, he grunted. Quite. Simon had begun to show the first sweat. Are we discussing bulbs now? Is this an electrical inquest? We are discussing assistance, Wolf said. A fading ribbon provides one timetable. Heat and concentrated light may shorten it. Lena stared. You mean the room helped the words disappear? The room, Wolf said, did nothing. A room is innocent until occupied. Martha Wynne took a breath. Mr. Wolf, there was another thing. Simon barked. You've remembered enough already. Wolf turned his head slowly. When Mr. Simon had the paper, he kept turning it a little like this. She demonstrated with her hands. Not just to read, more as if he wanted the light to strike it all over. That was plenty. Wolf's eyes closed, not in fatigue, in arrangement. 3 witnesses had seen words on a page and believed they were seeing the same truth. Simon remembered profit. Lena remembered insult. Martha remembered labor, because labor notices what vanity misses. Simon had been named sole heir, so they said. Yet Simon had also insisted on stronger light, closer light, hotter light, not because he doubted the words, but because he needed them to hurry toward uncertainty after they had served him. When Wolf opened his eyes again, they were no longer patient. Mr. Creel's paper did not merely fade, he said. It was helped by the ribbon. Yes, but also by the lamp, by proximity, and by a man anxious that truth should become confusion before morning. Simon rose half out of his chair. That proves nothing. No, Wolf said, but it begins to prove you. And that was the first real crack. Until then, the case had been a contrivance. A dying man, a blank page, and a schedule. Now it had fingers on it. Simon had wanted witnesses, but not certainty. He had wanted the paper believed at once and doubted later. Wolf had begun to suspect that the fading was not merely natural, nor merely chemical. It had been urged along by the room itself, by heat, light, and a helpful hand. Which meant the last room upstairs had been less a death chamber than a workshop. Chapter 5. The signature that stayed by Friday afternoon. The case had ceased to be merely eccentric, and had become what Wolf likes best, orderly. That did not make it pleasant. Order, in human affairs, is often only another name for design, and design in this instance had begun to smell strongly of fraud. The paper lay on Wolf's desk under the green-shaded lamp, blank except for the one stubborn fact it had preserved. Jonas Creel. The name stood there in black, full, bodied, unquestionable. Above it, the body of the codicil had gone to ghosts. Wolf had spent an hour with the sheet, a magnifying glass, a pad, and the expression of a man listening to something too faint for other ears. I had watched as long as patience permitted, and then amused myself by imagining what Inspector Kramer would say if he saw the great Nero Wolf staring at a nearly blank page, as if it contained the confession of a king. At length Wolf said, "Archie." "Yes, sir." "The first solid truth that the dead man was named Jonas Creel." He glared. The signature remained because it was written in a different ink from the text. I sat up. "You're sure?" "Morally and nearly physically. The signature has penetrated the paper fibers more deeply and with a different edge spread. The typed text, such remnants as survive, lay upon the surface more lightly. The two were never of one character. That tracks with the doctored ribbon. It does more than track, it separates." He handed me the magnifier and pointed. I bent over the page. I am no laboratory, but even I could see it once he showed me. The signature had body, weight, decision. The faint residue of the vanished wording looked superficial by comparison, like something laid on and never fully married to the paper. "So Jonas signed first," I said. "Very likely. And the wording came later." "Yes, that was the hinge. Up to then, the trick might still have been argued into some grotesque half-innocence, a valid codicil written with unstable materials, an old ribbon, a dying man's impatience, misfortune dressed as mystery. But if the signature came first, and the words later, innocence packed its bag and went out the back door, I said. Then the paper was not forged in full, only completed dishonestly. Precisely, the most efficient deceptions are often partial. A genuine signature on an incomplete sheet is a splendid foundation for fraud. It borrows the authority of the dead to decorate a lie. I looked again at the name, Jonas Creel. A man vain enough to rearrange his will as theatre, suspicious enough to test people, and careless enough, or weak enough, to put his name where it could be used against the truth. Or perhaps, I thought, not careless at all. With Jonas, even a blunder had begun to look like bait. Wolf spoke as if answering me. He likely signed the sheet earlier under another pretext, a blank for future correction, a draft not yet completed, a page substituted among papers. There are several possibilities, none honorable. And later someone added false wording in temporary compound on the ribbon. Yes, a text designed to live just long enough to be read aloud, believed, and then evaporate into dispute. I crossed to my desk and sat down. That changes the whole shape. It changes the category, Wolf said. This is no longer primarily a quarrel over inheritance. It is calculated deception. The estate is merely its occasion. That was Wolf all over. Take a snarled family tangle, strip off the grievance, and pin the mechanism to the wall. Chapter 5. The signature that stayed by Friday afternoon. The case had ceased to be merely eccentric and had become what Wolf likes best, orderly. That did not make it pleasant. Order, in human affairs, is often only another name for design, and design in this instance had begun to smell strongly of fraud. The paper lay on Wolf's desk under the green shaded lamp, blank except for the one stubborn fact it had preserved. Jonas Creel. The name stood there in black, full-bodied, unquestionable. Above it, the body of the codicil had gone to ghosts. Wolf had spent an hour with the sheet, a magnifying glass, a pad, and the expression of a man listening to something too faint for other ears. I had watched as long as patience permitted, and then amused myself by imagining what Inspector Kramer would say if he saw the great Nero Wolf staring at a nearly blank page, as if it contained the confession of a king. At length Wolf said, "Archie." "Yes, sir." "The first solid truth, that the dead man was named Jonas Creel." He glared. "The signature remained because it was written in a different ink from the text." I sat up. "You're sure?" "Morally and nearly physically. The signature has penetrated the paper fibers more deeply and with a different edge spread. The typed text, such remnants as survive, lay upon the surface more lightly. The two were never of one character." "That tracks with the doctored ribbon." "It does more than track, it separates." He handed me the magnifier and pointed. I bent over the page. I am no laboratory, but even I could see it once he showed me. The signature had body, weight, decision. The faint residue of the vanished wording looked superficial by comparison, like something laid on and never fully married to the paper. "So Jonas signed first," I said. "Very likely." "And the wording came later." "Yes." That was the hinge. Up to then, the trick might still have been argued into some grotesque half-innocence, a valid codicil written with unstable materials, an old ribbon, a dying man's impatience, misfortune dressed as mystery. But if the signature came first, and the words later, innocence packed its bag and went out the back door, I said, then the paper was not forged in full, only completed dishonestly. Precisely, the most efficient deceptions are often partial. A genuine signature on an incomplete sheet is a splendid foundation for fraud. It borrows the authority of the dead to decorate a lie. I looked again at the name, Jonas Creel, a man vain enough to rearrange his will as theatre, suspicious enough to test people, and careless enough, or weak enough, to put his name where it could be used against the truth, or perhaps, I thought, not careless at all. With Jonas, Even a blunder had begun to look like bait. Wolf spoke as if answering me. He likely signed the sheet earlier under another pretext, a blank for future correction. A draft not yet completed. A page substituted among papers. There are several possibilities, none honorable. And later someone added false wording in temporary compound on the ribbon. Yes, a text designed to live just long enough to be read aloud, believed, and then evaporate into dispute. I crossed to my desk and sat down. That changes the whole shape. It changes the category, Wolf said. This is no longer primarily a quarrel over inheritance. It is calculated deception. The estate is merely its occasion. That was Wolf all over. Take a snarled family tangle, strip off the grievance, and pin the mechanism to the wall. I said, let's walk it. Jonas signs a sheet earlier. Someone keeps or retrieves it. On the right evening, with the right ribbon already in the typewriter, false wording is added above the genuine signature. Borden reads it, Levin sees it, the others see it, and Simon helpfully roasts it under the lamp to hurry the fading. By morning the text has done its work and vanished. Wolf nodded once. A sequence both simple and exact. Too exact for improvisation. Entirely. Which is why motive alone has bored me from the outset. He pushed the page away, as if it had finally yielded enough for one sitting. The question now is not who wanted money. Everyone wanted something. The question is who had access to a signed but incomplete sheet, who could prepare the machine, and who knew the household drama well enough to time the performance. That narrows it. It begins to. I leaned back. And Simon. Simon is greedy, vain, and quite possibly active, but do not simplify too soon. A man may heat a paper without having conceived it. Another may provide the design and let him supply the stupidity. That was fair. In a case like this, greed supplies helpers wholesale. The room was quiet. Outside, New York kept moving in its Friday restlessness. Taxis grumbling, horns objecting, people bargaining with weather and traffic and one another. Inside the brownstone, with the books and the rug and Wolf planted like an emperor among them, a single signature had become the first real anchor in a sea of performance. I said, "You sound almost pleased." "I am never pleased by fraud. Number only nourished by it." His lips compressed. "Archie, your tendency to garnish truth with insolence remains deplorable, but useful." "Yes," he said reluctantly. "At times." He looked again at the paper. The false wording had vanished. The signature had stayed. That meant the lie had not been born whole. It had been built around something real, which is the way the best lies are made. Wolf had found the first solid truth in the case not by chasing anger, or inheritance, or memory, but by studying what endured. And once that truth was in hand, the matter could no longer pretend to be a family dispute over a dying man's wishes. It was what it had really been from the start, a deliberate construction, precise in timing, dishonest in method, and dangerous because it wore one genuine thing at its bottom, a dead man's name. Chapter 6. The Doctor's Shelf. Once a case acquires chemicals, half the world becomes plausible. That is one reason. Chemical evidence attracts bad detectives. They see a bottle and fall in love. Wolf, who seldom fell in love with anything outside the plant rooms, and Fritz's better efforts merely got more cautious. It was Dr. Caleb Drew who supplied the next temptation. I went to see him Saturday morning under instructions simple enough to conceal their claws. "Observe," Wolf had said. "Do not pounce. A doctor with shelves is not therefore a poisoner, a chemist, or a fool, though he may be any two of the three." Drew's surgery occupied the ground floor of a narrow house on West 58th Street, where the brass plate on the door had been polished. So often it had become a moral statement. His waiting room was empty, which either meant excellent scheduling or a practice on the decline. I was shown in at once. He looked less like a country magistrate than ever, and more like a man who had spent years telling pain to wait its turn. "You again," he said. "That is the penalty of being useful. To whom, that changes by the hour." He gave me a stare that suggested he had little use for badinage before noon. "What do you want?" A look, At what? At anything on your shelves that might help writing appear, disappear, blur, or misbehave. His face did not change enough for the average observer, but I have spent years watching people discover that Wolf knows where to scratch. Drew's eyelids lowered a shade. You have no right to inspect my professional supplies. Right is a word lawyers use when they haven't got cooperation. That is not an answer. It is the one available. He stood. Very well. Look, then leave. He led me into the surgery proper. It was spotless in the way some men keep accounts. Not from love of order, but from distrust of accident. Glass-fronted cabinets lined one wall. On the shelves were the ordinary medical impedimenta of the period. Brown bottles, white labels, gauze, cotton, antiseptics, tinctures, spirits, powders, and enough polished metal to make a hypochondriac faint from admiration. Also, because Wolf had been right to send me, there were a few less ordinary items: gum solvents, cleaning spirits, a reducing solution used for old stains, a bottle of oxalic acid marked poison, and 2 unlabeled dropper flasks. I let my eyes drift without pausing too eagerly. You keep a nice little laboratory. I keep a medical practice. Some of this looks broader than medicine. It looks exactly as broad as years of practice require. One acquires things, such as solutions that alter marks on paper. He turned his head. You are reaching. Only because the shelf is high. He said nothing. I moved to a side table where a tray held instruments, a notebook, and several sheets of scrap paper. One bore a pen line washed halfway to invisibility, as if someone had tested a fluid on it. That interested me more than the bottles. You do experiments for the amusement of your patients? I asked. Drew looked at the paper, then at me. That was for removing an iodine stain. From paper. Yes. Convenient medium. I use what is at hand. That was fair, but not comforting. I stayed another 10 minutes, enough to note the names of what I could and the positions of the rest, then withdrew with politeness just short of apology. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolf the inventory. He listened with eyes shut, hands folded over the yellow pages of a book on historic inks he had pulled from the shelves as if it had insulted him first. When I had finished, I said, Well, he echoed. Dr. Drew had access to materials with which a clever man might prepare unstable compounds, thin ink, remove writing, alter stains, or generally entertain himself at the expense of certainty. You don't sound dazzled. I am not. He opened his eyes. Knowledge alone explains nothing important. Because the document was not merely falsified, it was performed. That was the word he wanted, and it fit. A sheet prepared with temporary text was only half the trick. The rest required the room, the witnesses, the timing, the reading aloud, the dying man, the lamp, the quarrels, and the certainty that by morning the paper would have shed its usefulness and turned into argument. I said, a doctor could mix a fluid or doctor a ribbon. Yes, but that doesn't explain why the false will needed to be seen first and doubted later. Exactly. Wolf leaned back. If one wished simply to forge a testamentary instrument, one would preserve it. One would desire endurance, not decay. Here decay was essential. The deception required public acceptance followed by documentary failure. Why? So that memory would fight paper, and where memory fights paper, personalities enter. Vanity, grievance, self-interest, wounded pride. In such a contest, truth is delayed, and delay is often profitable. I thought it over. Then Drew may have had the shelf, but not the stage. Perhaps. Or he may have supplied one to someone else. Do not begin eliminating yet. The front bell rang. I went and came back with Nathaniel Borden, who looked as if legal uncertainty had been eating his digestion from both ends. He handed Wolf a packet, my notes on the previous proposed codicils. Wolf examined them in silence. I watched his eyes move. After a minute, he said, Interesting. That is one of his meaner words, because it can cover a continent and gives away nothing. Borden moistened his lips. What is interesting? Mr. Creel's alterations were not random, they rotated. Rotated. Yes, first Miss Harrow benefited. Then Simon Creel, then Mrs. Wynne, then a charitable disposition, then again Mrs. Wynne. He was not revising from conviction, but cycling through effects. Borden sagged. Good God. Not at all. Wolfe said, merely Jonas Creel. That tightened the screws another notch. A man changing his will from belief is one thing. A man changing it as a wheel of private punishment is another. In the second case, anyone near him could begin to predict patterns, moods, opportunities, I said. So the false document wasn't just about money, it was tailored to the current arrangement of resentment. Precisely, it had to be credible on that evening, in that room, among those people. Wolfe tapped Borden's notes. Which is why Dr. Drew's shelf interests me but does not tempt me. Chemicals may prepare a means. They do not select an audience. Borden stared at the blank codicil on the desk. Then you do not think Drew did it? I think, Wolfe said, that accusing a man because he owns bottles is as foolish as acquitting him because he owns a stethoscope. That settled Borden, though it did not comfort him. After he had gone, I said, you really don't like Drew for it. I do not like anyone yet. That's caution talking. Number it is appetite. We are close enough now that a premature accusation would be vulgar. He shut his eyes again, which meant the audience was over. Attention had fallen on Dr. Caleb Drew because he possessed what others lacked. Chemical supplies, specialized solutions, privacy enough to test a fluid or prepare a ribbon. He had access, knowledge, and a shelf full of suspicious little assurances in glass. But Wolfe would not rush. The shelf explained possibility, not design. Summoner had needed the false will not merely to exist, but to bloom briefly in full view and then wither into doubt. That required more than chemistry, it required a sense of theater, a reading of character, and the cold foresight to know exactly when confusion would be more useful than proof. And that, Wolfe thought, belonged not to a shelf, but to a mind. Chapter 7. The heat above the bed. By Sunday morning the case had developed a spine. It still lacked a face, but a spine is a comfort. A mystery with no structure is only gossip in evening clothes, and Wolfe has no patience with gossip unless it can be made to sit down and confess. He sent me back to Riddle Street, with one instruction that sounded harmless. Look at the lamp again. That's all. Number, but it is enough. Riddle Street was quieter on Sunday, as if the whole block had been told to lower its voice for respectable death. Martha Wynne admitted me with less resentment than before, which meant either she had grown used to trouble or had begun to prefer it to the company she kept. Jonas Creel's upstairs room looked thinner, without the bustle that had filled it earlier in the week. Death rooms do that. Once the body is gone and the first parade of grief, greed, and authority has passed through, the furniture seems embarrassed to remain. The bed stood as before, turned slightly toward the reading table and the bookshelves opposite. The bedside lamp was gone, of course. We had it, but its place remained marked on the small table by a paler ring in the dust. I stood where Simon had stood, where Lena had stood, where Martha had held the second lamp like an unwilling acolyte at a private ritual. Then I saw what Wolfe had expected me to see. Above the bed, fastened to the wall behind the headboard, was a small metal bracket, with a swivel arm and an empty socket fixture, the kind intended to direct light down over a reader's shoulder. It had been disconnected recently. A faint scorch mark discolored the wallpaper above it, and the flexible arm was bent lower than such a lamp is usually bent, unless someone had deliberately trained it to throw heat and light almost straight downward. I called for Martha. She came, planted herself in the doorway, and looked as if she would just as soon not revisit anything in that room again for 20 years. That wall lamp, I said. Was it used? Not lately. It got too hot. Too hot for what? For Mr. Creel's liking made the pillow warm. Mrs. Wynne had it disconnected a month ago. Who bent the arm? She peered. It was always lower toward the end. Mr. Simon fooled with it once. I remember that. When, a week or more ago, Mr. Creel had him up here talking accounts or family or some such poison. And after, when I came in, the lamp was set low over the bed and Mr. Creel was cursing the heat of it. That was worth carrying home in my teeth. Did anyone else adjust it? Mr. Creel himself sometimes. He liked the light, just so when he read in bed. Would the heat fall on the paper if a page were held there? She looked at me. Anything held there would have got hot enough. That did it. I studied the room again, between the bedside table, the removed reading lamp, and the old wall fixture. There had once been enough concentrated light over that bed to roast a false document, like a chestnut. Back at the brownstone I found Wolf in the office, with the detached bedside lamp on the side table and a notebook open before him. He had not moved much, but his eyes they were alive. Well, he asked. I told him about the wall fixture, the scorch mark, the bent arm, and Martha's memory of Simon lowering it days before. Wolf grunted once. Good. That's all. Number it is enough. I sat, you knew. I suspected that a second source of heat had once fallen directly over the bed. Yes, and that the culprit relied on both chemistry and room arrangement, obviously. He pointed at the lamp on the table. This lamp concentrates light in a narrow field. The wall fixture, set low, would intensify that field and sustain warmth in the same area. Add a doctored ribbon producing unstable text, and you have acceleration available at will. I leaned back. Meaning the fading was not merely scheduled in general. It could be hurried in particulars, precisely. That was handsome and nasty. A prepared ribbon would make the typed words temporary. Heat would make them more temporary. If someone needed the document legible while Borden read it and while the witnesses stared. But not much longer. The room itself could be used to squeeze the timing, I said. Then Simon's insistence on holding the lamp low wasn't theatrical, it was technical. Wolf's lips tightened. It now appears so. He knew the paper needed help, or had been told so. That cooled me a little. In these cases, the obvious villain often turns out to be merely the obvious fool, Wolf went on. A deception of this sort requires 3 elements. First, preparation, the sheet already signed. The ribbon altered, the machine ready. Second, performance, the document read, displayed, believed. Third, acceleration, heat and light applied, so that certainty decays before the paper falls into calmer hands. And Simon fits the third. Yes, extremely well, but not necessarily the first. There you improve. The office was quiet for a moment except for a taxi sounding annoyed on the street outside and the soft tick of the clock on the mantel. Fritz was somewhere at the back of the house conducting his own private religion with butter. The smell of coffee drifted in faintly, and Wolf ignored it because his mind was chewing something richer. I said, so where does that leave us? With method clearer and agency still divided. Meaning the hand behind the trick is not yet fully exposed. Simon had motive, and now something like operational behavior. But the conception may have belonged elsewhere. He is capable of greed and clumsiness. I am not yet persuaded of precision. Lina, intelligent enough. March, certainly. Thorn, too careful to expose himself and less compelled. Drew, still a shelf, not a stage. That was Wolf at his most irritating and most useful. He would not fall in love with a suspect, merely because the suspect was handy. He reached for the blank codicil and touched the edge with one finger. The heat above the bed settles one thing. The fading was accelerated on purpose. Therefore, whoever arranged the fraud did not trust the chemistry alone. He wanted control at the last moment. I nodded. And last, moment control means someone in the room. Yes, the room upstairs had become less a place of death than a machine of timing. The doctored ribbon gave the false words a short life. The lamps shortened it further. Simon's eagerness to hold the light low, once merely rude, had turned sinister. He had not been helping people read. He had been helping the evidence die. But if Simon had helped, help is not authorship. Wolf could now see the method nearly entire. The temporary text, the genuine signature, the arranged witnesses, the heat. What he did not yet have, and would not fake having, was the full chain from design to performance. The hand behind it remained just out of sight. And Wolf, who hated being kept from a hand once he had found the fingers, was beginning to enjoy himself. Chapter 8. The borrowed key. A case can sit for days on a detail too small to be called a fact. Then some overworked woman with tired hands remembers where she set a key, and the whole contraption lurches forward. That happened Monday morning. Martha Wynne came to the brownstone of her own accord, announced in the hall with the grim determination of one who had spent the night arguing with memory and lost. I brought her into the office. She stood just inside the door, clutching her handbag as if it contained either courage or indigestion. Wolf surveyed her from his chair. "Yes, madam. I remembered something," she said. "Or maybe I'd remembered it before and not known it mattered." "That," I told her, "is how memory keeps itself fashionable." She ignored me, sensible woman. "It was about Mr. Simon," she said. "And the key." Wolf's eyes sharpened. "Proceed." Martha took a breath. 2 weeks ago, maybe a little more, I went with Mr. Creel to Dr. Drew's surgery. Mr. Creel had one of his spells and wanted to speak to the doctor in private. I was left in the waiting room with Mr. Simon, who had come along for no earthly reason except that he was hanging about the house. "That sounds like Simon," I said. She nodded. "There was a side cabinet in the back room where the doctor kept bottles and papers and such. Mr. Simon asked me whether I knew where the key was kept. I said yes, because I had seen Dr. Drew hang it on a little hook beneath the shelf. Mr. Simon laughed and said the doctor trusted his own dust too much." Wolf's fingers moved once on the chair arm. "Did you give him the key?" She looked miserable. "Only for a minute. He said Dr. Drew had promised him a sleeping powder for Mr. Creel, and that he didn't want to interrupt the conversation. I lent it to him. He went into the back room alone and came out inside of 2 minutes." I said, "And returned the key." "Yes, did you tell anyone?" Number, it seemed nothing at the time. I had forgotten it clean until yesterday when I passed the doctor's house and saw the brass plate. Wolf said. "Describe the cabinet." "A narrow glass, front one in the side room, bottles, droppers, folded papers, all neat as church." That matched what I had seen on Dr. Drew's shelf, and the case gave a small internal click of satisfaction. Until then, Drew's surgery had been a possibility without a bridge. Now the bridge had appeared, and it had Simon walking over it with a borrowed key in his pocket. When Martha had gone, Wolf sat silent for half a minute. That is a long time with him when thought has teeth. At last I said, "Well, the path," he said, "is open. That's poetic for breakfast." He ignored it. Simon had motive through inheritance, appetite through debt, and now access to the specialized materials without requiring Drew's assistance. He could have obtained solvents, reducing fluids, or anything else useful for treating a ribbon or testing instability, meaning Drew's shelf stays suspicious, but Drew himself drops a rung. Yes, knowledge was present there, but not necessarily intent. Simon could borrow the means. I leaned back and let it arrange itself. Simon could have got the chemicals himself. Simon had been in the room. Simon had insisted on the lamp. Simon had wanted the paper believed quickly, and then not too carefully. It was almost handsome in its ugliness. "Then the fraud is nearly closed," I said. "Nearly. There's a but coming. There is always a but when one is not yet finished." He tapped the blank codicil. "Forgery alone does not explain Jonas Creel's death." I frowned. "You still think the death itself is part of it?" "I think the timing of the death is inseparable from the fraud. A doctored document shown to witnesses is one thing. A dying man who cannot later deny, correct, or elaborate is another." That had been sitting in the back of my mind and irritating it for 2 chapters. I brought it forward. Creel was sick. Drew and Levin both say so. He could have died naturally at the worst possible moment and saved a criminal considerable trouble. "Yes," Wolf said. He could have convenient deaths occur, but one does not trust convenience when design is already proven. I got up and crossed to the window, then turned back. Let's walk it again. Simon obtains materials by using Martha's borrowed key at Drew's surgery. He helps prepare the ribbon, or at least knows how it behaves. He has the paper displayed and helps the fading with the lamp. But if Jonas survives another day or two, the fraud becomes dangerous. The old man might remember what he signed, or deny the wording, or merely change his mind again. Precisely. Therefore, forgery alone is unstable unless death freezes it. Wolf gave a small nod. You improve by exercise. That's touching. So either Simon relied on a natural death already near risky, or someone made sure Jonas died when the paper was useful. Yes, that was the ugly center of it. Up to then, the fraud had been clever, had a death arranged or hastened, and cleverness turns mean. The bell rang. I went and came back with Dr. Drew, who looked annoyed enough to require no introduction. Wolf had sent for him after Martha left. He took the red leather chair and said, "If this is about my supplies again, I have already told your assistant." Wolf cut him off. "Did you keep a key to the side cabinet on a hook in your surgery?" Drew stared. "Yes. Could it be borrowed briefly by a visitor without your knowledge?" Drew's face changed, but only by an ounce possibly. Did Simon Creel ever have such an opportunity? Drew was silent too long. "Ah," Wolf said. Drew exhaled through his nose. "There was one occasion. I found the key not on its hook, but on the tray table and thought I had misplaced it myself." 2 weeks ago. Yes. And you told no one? Number nothing appeared missing. That, I said, depends on your view of missing. Drew ignored me with professional discipline. Wolf leaned back. Then we need not trouble you with theories of your complicity, Doctor. Your carelessness suffices. Drew flushed. He rose half an inch, then sat back. If Simon took anything, I did not aid him. I believe you, Wolf said. That surprised Drew more than accusation would have. After he left, I asked, "Did you mean it?" "Yes. You sound confident." "I am nearly entitled to be." Nearly again. Yes, Simon now reaches from motive to method by his own hand. The borrowed key gives him access to materials. The lamp gives him acceleration. The witnesses give him temporary reality. But the case is not complete because the fraud, however skillful, still leaves the dead man's timing to chance. And you don't believe he left it to chance. He shut his eyes. That was that for outward talk, but the shape was plain enough even without his saying more. Martha's forgotten kindness had given Simon a bridge between appetite and chemistry. He had not needed the doctor as partner, only the doctor's orderly shelf and an opportunity to borrow from it. The false document could now be traced almost from conception to execution. Almost. Because a forged codicil, even one built around a genuine signature and helped along by heat, still does not kill a man. Jonas Creel's death had arrived at precisely the moment when contradiction would have been most dangerous to the fraud and silence most useful. Wolf now saw the deception nearly whole. What he did not yet have, but was very close to, was the point where deception touched murder. Chapter 9. The words before the end by Tuesday Wolf had enough of the case to become dangerous to everyone in it and agreeable to no one. That is always a promising stage. He had spent the morning with Borden's notes, the laboratory report on the ribbon, my memorandum on Dr. Drew's cabinet, and 3 pages of his own in that cramped script, which looks as if the words are annoyed at having to stand in line. At 11 he sent for me. "Sit down, Archie. I will now save you from several incorrect ideas. That is what I come to the office for." He ignored the tribute. "The fraud is plain. Simon obtained access to chemical materials by borrowing the key to Drew's side cabinet he prepared, or had prepared, an unstable ribbon for Creel's typewriter. He acquired a sheet genuinely signed by Creel, whether from prior handling of papers or from a page signed in anticipation of later completion. On the chosen evening, false wording was typed above the signature, Borden read it. The others saw it. Simon then encouraged the lamp and heat, so the wording would fade rapidly, leaving only memory to support his claim. I nodded. That much stands. It does more than stand, it explains the paper. Wolf steepled his fingers, but it does not yet explain the death. I had been waiting for that. The fraud had become almost neat, and neat fraud is one of the world's nastier things. But Jonas Creel's death had always sat beside it, like a second chair at the table. Go on, I said. Creel was ill. Yes, Creel might have died that night naturally. Yes, but that is not enough. Observe the sequence. The false paper is created. It is read aloud. It begins its timed disappearance. If Creel then lies quiet and dies before speaking further, Simon prospers. If Creel survives to morning, or even an hour, he may repudiate the wording, recall what he actually signed, or merely create further confusion, fatal to the scheme. Therefore Simon needed either luck or certainty. Yes, and men such as Simon often rely on luck until it disappoints them. Then they become clumsy. That was Wolf's kind of knife, small, neat, and inserted between the ribs. I said, "You think Creel woke to it?" "I do not think, I infer strongly. There is evidence." That got me upright. What evidence? Mrs. Wynn's recollection that she heard him say, earlier in the evening, "You think a name on paper makes you safe. It makes you naked." At the time she could not place the remark. Neither could we. Now we can. I stared. He had already suspected someone meant to use his signature. Precisely, he had sensed danger around papers already signed. That is why he had been repeatedly altering dispositions, revising drafts, staging rehearsals. He was not merely tormenting his household. He was reacting to a fear he could neither master nor articulate. That tightened the whole thing beautifully and horribly. Jonas, with all his vanity and malice, had been playing his own private game while someone else had been laying track under it, Wolf went on. The crucial moment came after the false wording had been added and displayed. Creel, weakened and perhaps drifting in and out, had not at first grasped the substitution. Then he did. How? By seeing it, by hearing a phrase not his own, by recognizing that a sheet he had signed bore words he had not authorized. I let that sit in me. A sick old man, difficult, theatrical, suspicious, and then suddenly fully awake for the one thing that mattered, seeing his own name enlisted in a fraud. He understood the trap set around his signature, I said. Yes, and then the fraud became dangerous to the fraudster. That was it. Up to that instant Simon's scheme had been deception, inheritance theft, documentary trickery dressed for probate court. The moment Jonas understood and could speak, it became something else. Not because paper had changed, but because a living witness had, I said. You think he protested? Certainly. Did anyone hear it? Not in words they recognized, but Levin reported an attack shortly after the display of the document. Borden described confusion, Clara. Lena remembered agitation. Martha heard raised voices. Simon had motive to prevent coherence. He had no need to kill until Creel became articulate against him. I got up and paced once to the window and back. With what? A pillow, a hand medicine. Wolf made a face. Do not leap where the ground is enough. A weak heart permits economies. A man already close to collapse can be pushed by shock, exertion, struggle, or the withholding of aid for seconds that matter. That was grim, but not melodramatic. Real murder often borrows natural weakness instead of inventing violence. You think Simon confronted him. I think Creel roused, saw the false document, and spoke, perhaps only a few words. Simon, realizing the danger, acted at once. He may have bent over him, silenced him physically, or delayed Levin's access by moments. It need not have been elaborate. A failing man can be killed by assistance in the wrong direction. That had the right chill. Not a dagger, not poison, not some gaudy criminal apparatus, just pressure where there should have been relief, delay where there should have been speed, a hand at the mouth of a truth too inconvenient to survive. I said, and afterward, the death looked natural. Because it nearly was. That is why the scheme had merit. Fraud, first. Then a death easily attributed to illness. The typed words would fade. The witnesses would quarrel. Simon would insist on memory and inheritance, while the only man able to deny the text lay suitably dead. Except Jonas wasn't quiet enough. Number he saw. That was the chapter's title in my head before Wolf ever said it. The words before the end. Not the false words on the page, but the real words Jonas had tried to get out when he understood what had been done. I said, "Can you prove it?" Not yet to Kramer, nearly to myself. That's never enough for him. Number, he is a burdensome man. The bell rang, and a minute later Inspector Kramer came in as if summoned by malice, which in a way he had been. He took one look at Wolf's face and scowled. "You've got something?" Wolf nodded. "Yes. Then spill it. Sit down." Kramer sat with the air of a man humoring a boa constrictor. Wolf said, "The document was fraudulent, that you may take as settled. The ribbon in Creel's machine had been chemically treated to produce writing that would fade within hours. The signature on the sheet was genuine and earlier. False wording was later typed above it. Simon Creel then ensured the paper was displayed under concentrated light and heat to accelerate the disappearance." Kramer's eyes moved to me. I nodded once. He swore softly. "That's fraud," he said. "Where's homicide?" Wolf folded his hands. In necessity, the fraud was incomplete while Jonas Creel lived and could contradict it. He did not die quietly before the trick finished its work. He awoke, saw the false document, understood the use made of his signature, and became a mortal danger to Simon's scheme. In that moment, deception became murder. Kramer grunted. "Theory. Of course. But a theory growing bones. Such as Simon's motive, Simon's access to the doctor's cabinet, Simon's conduct with the lamp, Simon's lies about touching the typewriter, Simon's need for Creel's silence, and the timing of the fatal attack immediately after the document was displayed." Kramer looked at me again. "You buying this?" "I'm renting with an option," he snorted. "That means yes." Wolf continued. "Simon did not invent the dying heart. He used it. The law is perfectly capable of understanding that a man may murder by turning weakness into opportunity." Kramer rose. "If you're right, you still need the last inch." "Yes," Wolf said calmly. "I know." After he had gone, unconvinced, but no longer comfortable, I looked across the desk at Wolf. "So, what's the last inch?" "Admission," he said. "Or contradiction arranged under pressure. Simon is vain, indebted, and no longer as safe as he believes. He will talk if the room is arranged correctly. That means the office gathering, obviously." I sat down again and looked at the blank codicil lying there like a joke told too long. The crime had at last come together. Simon had used a genuine signed sheet, added false wording with fading ink, and arranged for witnesses to remember what the paper would later deny. He had built a trap in which memory would outlive evidence, and greed would speak louder than certainty. But Jonas Creel had not played his assigned part. He had not died in orderly ignorance. He had awoken, seen the lie standing on his own name, and understood. In that instant, the scheme could no longer remain a theft dressed as probate. It needed silence more permanent than fading words. And that was when it became murder. Chapter 10. The ink that named a killer on Wednesday at 6 o'clock, the office on West 35th Street, contained enough grievance, vanity, and concealed appetite to start a small republic. Wolf had ordered chairs brought in from the front room, and I had arranged them in the usual crescent that means one thing in our establishment. Somebody is about to stop lying voluntarily and begin doing it under pressure. The yellow lamps were on. Outside, March rain was threatening the city without quite committing itself, and the windows held a dim grey New York evening against the warm interior of books, leather, and Wolf's implacable bulk behind his desk. Present were Inspector Kramer, looking as if he had come only to prevent a felony and might settle for an ulcer, Nathaniel Borden with legal misery in both hands. Lena Harrow, cool and rigid, Martha Wynne, unhappy but steady. Dr. Caleb Drew, professionally offended. Dr. Levin and Simon Creel, who had dressed carefully for what he expected, would be vindication, and had achieved only nervous elegance. Fritz had served beer to Kramer and coffee to the rest, and had then withdrawn to a point just beyond the door, where he could hear everything, while pretending not to. Wolf let the room settle. He likes silence, the way a violinist likes tuning. Then he said, "The matter before us began with a paper and ended with a death. Those are ordinary enough materials. What was less ordinary was the intelligence misapplied to both." Simon shifted and crossed one leg over the other. "If this is another performance, Mr. Wolf, I suggest you save it for the police court," Kramer grunted. "Sit still." Wolf inclined his head a fraction. "Mr. Creel, you may leave when I am done, if Inspector Kramer permits. Until then, your suggestions are unnecessary." He placed the faded codicil on the desk in front of him. It was still what it had been from the morning Borden first brought it. A sheet with one surviving truth at the bottom, and treachery turned pale above it. "This document," Wolf said, "was never what it appeared to be. Jonas Creel's signature is genuine. The body of the text was not genuinely joined to that signature. It was later added by means of a typewriter ribbon, deliberately treated to produce unstable writing, readable for some hours, and then designed to fade." Dr. Drew moved. "You have laboratory confirmation?" "Yes. Inspector Kramer has it." Kramer nodded once, reluctantly, like a man admitting the weather. Wolf continued. "The signature endured because it was written in ordinary ink, probably at an earlier time. The typed wording vanished because the medium was temporary, and because heat and concentrated light were used to accelerate the process." Martha Wynne clasped her hands tighter. Lena looked at Simon. Simon gave a short laugh. "That proves a trick. If it proves anything, it doesn't prove me." "No," Wolf said. "Not yet. So let us proceed with the conveniences you arranged for yourself." He lifted one finger. "First, access to materials." Suspicion naturally touched Dr. Drew because his surgery contained the sorts of solutions by which a clever man might doctor ribbon ink or test the fading of marks. But Dr. Drew did not assist. He was merely careless. "Mrs. Wynne remembered lending you a key that gave you temporary access to the side cabinet in his surgery." All eyes went to Simon. He spread his hands. "A housekeeper's memory, aided," Wolf said dryly, "by Dr. Drew's own recollection that the key was found displaced on the relevant occasion. You had opportunity to obtain what you needed without the doctor's knowledge." Drew's face darkened. "If he took anything, he did," Wolf said, "though perhaps not enough for your shelves to notice." Simon's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. "Second," Wolf said, "access to the machine. The false wording was typed on Jonas Creel's typewriter, using a ribbon you or someone acting for you had prepared. You lied about touching the machine after the signing. Dr. Levin's recollection and the statements of others place you at the desk." Simon leaned forward. "Leaning on a desk is not forgery." "No," Wolf said, "only proximity." He raised another finger. "Third, acceleration," Mrs. Wynne remembered. "And Miss Harrow confirmed that you insisted the document be held under strong light and that the lamp be brought very close. On our further investigation, we found that the bedside arrangement in Creel's room had been altered so that warmth fell directly over the paper. You did not merely display the document, you helped it die." Simon laughed again, but this time the sound was thin. "You make reading by lamplight sound criminal. Only when one reads by it with such purpose." The office stayed quiet. Rain began at last against the windows. Faint and even Wolf placed both hands on the desk. "Now we come to the point at which fraud became murder." That reached them. Even Kramer's shoulders changed. "Your scheme," Wolf said to Simon, "was clever enough for you. A genuine signature on a sheet, later completed dishonestly. False testamentary wording typed in unstable ink. Witnesses induced to see and remember what the paper would later deny. In probate, confusion. In confusion, opportunity. Had Jonas Creel remained passive and died without understanding, you might have prolonged the dispute, for months. Simon spoke at last, too fast. He did die, of his heart. Yes, Wolf said, but not before he understood. Simon's face altered then. Not much, just enough. With some men fear enters by the mouth. With Simon it came around the eyes, drawing them inward. Wolf saw it and pressed. Jonas Creel had been suspicious for weeks. He knew his signature made him vulnerable. That is why he had been changing drafts and rehearsing dispositions. Not merely from caprice, but from fear he scarcely understood. On the final evening, weakened though he was, he heard the false document read, or saw it displayed, and recognized that the words above his signature were not the words he had authorized. At that instant you were no longer merely a forger, you were a man in danger. No, Simon said. Wolf's voice did not rise. It never needed to. Yes, he awoke, understood the trap, and attempted to expose it. Whether he spoke your name, whether he tried to seize the page, whether he merely cried out that the paper was false, we need not know every syllable. We know enough. In order for your scheme to survive, Jonas Creel had to be silenced before Dr. Levin, Borden, or anyone else could extract a coherent repudiation. Simon stood up. This is fantasy, Kramer barked. Sit down. Simon sat. Wolf went on, as if nothing had happened. You did not need a knife. You did not need poison. A man in Jonas Creel's condition could be killed by force slight enough to pass for confusion, pressure while he struggled for breath, delay in summoning help, restraint during the crucial seconds when a weak heart converts panic into death. That is what you did. No. This time it came out loud enough to bounce off the books. Lena Harrow spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice low and hard. He did try to say something. I remember that now. We all thought he was rambling. Simon turned on her. You remember whatever suits you, Martha Wynne said. He was trying to point at the paper. Simon's head jerked toward her. That finished him more than if he had struck her. Wolf saw it and delivered the last turn. You trusted the words to vanish forever, Mr. Creel. That was your comfort. You believed the chemistry would erase the only dangerous part and leave behind a genuine signature to carry your lie. But vanished words are sometimes more eloquent than surviving ones. Their disappearance itself became evidence. The treated ribbon, the heat, the borrowed key, your conduct in the room, your need for the old man's silence, each one names you. Simon was breathing hard now. He looked not at Wolf, but at the codicil on the desk, as if the page itself had betrayed him. In a sense it had. He had trusted disappearance more than endurance, and now the absence of the words had become louder than their presence had ever been. Kramer rose slowly. You'd better have something to say, Simon. Simon looked at him, then at Lena, then at Martha, finally at Wolf. It was Wolf, I think, who broke him, not by force, but by the complete absence of mercy in his attention. Wolf can sit in a chair and make a liar feel not accused but finished. Simon's shoulders dropped. The style went out of him all at once, like air from a punctured toy. I didn't mean to kill him, he said. No one moved. I only wanted what should have been mine for years. Mine by blood, if not by his damned moods. His mouth twisted. He liked making me crawl. Every dollar, every promise, every invitation to the house. Always with a sneer, always with the chance he'd change everything before dessert. Do you know what it is to be kept hanging by an old man who enjoys your humiliation? Yes, Wolf said. Continue. Simon swallowed. I found the sheet earlier signed. It was among papers he had tossed aside. I saw what it was. Then at Drew's place I got what I needed to try the ribbon. Not much. Enough. I tested it first. It worked. His voice had gone flat now, with the dreadful relief of a man past pretending. I thought if the words were read and then vanished, there'd be argument, memory against paper. No proof either way. I could hold on. I could force a settlement. And Jonas. And Kramer demanded. Simon shut his eyes once and opened them. He saw it. After Borden read it, and while they were all talking, he looked right at the page. Then at me. He tried to get up, he said. Simon stopped, then pushed it out. He said, You little carrion fool. He kept trying to shout. He was weak, but not weak enough.